Game journalism. It seems to be one of the few occupations that the 30 and under set have dreamed of since their first exposure to gaming back in their early childhoods. Whether it was on an Intellivision, an Atari, an NES, or a Genesis, most gamers, regardless of the console they started out on, have given the idea more than just a passing thought. Who hasn't read a Nintendo Power article and thought to themselves, I could do that? Be it for fame, money, access to E3, or just plain old wish fulfillment, it would seem that the idea of covering the game industry strikes a similar chord in the minds of most gamers. It ranks right up there with occupations like game developer or tester, a fantasy job. It's the kind of idea that attracts advertisers in droves. They target it with the promises of easy placements within the industry and the tools needed to tighten up the graphics on level 3. And while we all might enjoy fantasizing about what it'd be like to have a profession which is at the same time both a hobby and a paycheck, have you ever stopped to consider that the job's title involves more than just the word game? Yes, I'm talking about the journalism part. It would seem as if the majority just skim over it, like the nutritional information on a package of Oreos. It's not really what they're interested in. They want satisfaction, not information. And as with most fantasies, there's a disconnect between what we imagine it to be like and what the reality really is, or more importantly, should be. I'd like to take a moment now and simply make a distinction between two different things. Between what a critic is and what a journalist is. On the surface, the two might appear to be almost the same thing, and at first glance I can understand why people might be led to believe this. But when you sit down and really think on it, there are some important differences that define what each profession is and the goals that each hope to attain. Now, both of these professions have a great deal in common. Each can cover a wide variety of subjects, from film to technology, gaming to art. There isn't really an area of everyday life or commerce which is off limits to either. Both can offer opinion, whether in the form of a critique or an op-ed, and each has the ability to sway minds and influence public opinion, be it Siskel giving a movie a thumbs down or Edward R. Murrow calling out McCarthy. But as similar as each is to the other, there are differences. Differences which, by their very nature, help to separate the two into completely different occupations. As I said, each can offer opinion in a multitude of forms, but it's what backs those opinions that make them so different. I'm talking about truth, about fact, the concept of honesty and the principle of integrity. A journalist is sworn to these things, a critic is not. And it is upon that point which the difference lies. A critic has no oath other than to their own opinion and viewpoint. They're not bound by a social contract to be unbiased or fair. They answer to nothing other than their own conscience. Now, before you take me to task for saying that, consider a few things. I want you to think back to the critics you know of. Think back to their work, their articles, their videos. Take a moment to remember all the times you chuckled at outrageous claims and allegations. Times where they swore of being near suicidal at the mere prospect of having to watch a certain movie or review a specific product. Think of all the times they used exaggeration and sensationalism to try and belittle something they disliked. And after you've done that, ask yourself, were they honest? Do you think the moment they put that movie they loathe so much into their VCR that they really had a shotgun at the ready? Or perhaps do you think they might have said and wrote the things they did more for effect than for fact? What was the purpose of their work? I think it can be best summed up in one word: entertainment. That isn't to say journalism can't be entertaining, but its aim is most definitely above that. While journalism can include a whole range of different elements to it, from humor to sarcasm, at its core, it's comprised of honesty. Factual honesty. Its goal is to report to the public information which they depend on or are interested in. But unlike a critic, journalists are sworn to something. They do have a social contract by which they should abide. They need to be able to put aside who they are and what they believe in to be able to bring to the masses an unbiased account of what's going on. Now, I'm not so naive as to imagine that you couldn't list off a dozen names from the top of your head that violate this very core principle of what it means to be a journalist. I could probably name you 24. But our being able to spot those who do a disservice to the profession only strengthens my point. Because if we are so easily able to spot what isn't good journalism, then it must mean that somewhere deep down within us, there exists a concept of what a good journalist is. And by being able to notice those who fall short of this profession's guiding principles, it must mean that we can see those principles in the first place. Tangent, I'm sure, is a word that comes to mind right about now. I started off talking about gaming, and now I've moved into defining two different occupations. But there is a method to this madness. I needed for you to be able to see the difference between these two groups before I continued. Like I had said earlier, we tend to forget that game journalism is more than just someone who covers games. They're a journalist, not a critic. While their opinion might interest us, we expect more than mere entertainment from them. We expect fact. This brings me back to the point of the video, namely the state of gaming journalism today, or as I like to lovingly call it, the decline of the fifth estate. For those of you out there who are unfamiliar with the usage of estates in the way that I mean them, let me give you a quick briefer on it. I was first introduced to the term by my journalism professor in college, and I'll explain it to you now as he explained it to me back then. The first three estates are made up of religion, government, and the public. The fourth estate is the press. Now, for a long time there were just these four, with the press, or the fourth estate, being thought of as a sort of counterbalance to the first three, able to report and keep in check the actions of the others. With the introduction of the internet came along a new estate, the fifth estate. While the new fifth branch is still being defined, it's easiest to think of it like this. The main difference between the fourth estate and the fifth one is where the onus lays. What I mean by that is, with the press, people expect that what they say and print will be factual, and therefore the onus is on them to be truthful. Whereas with the fifth estate, what you'll find more often than not is that the onus is laid upon you, the reader, to test the validity of the works you consume. You must be the fact checker. This is the main division between a blogger and a journalist. That professor and I had more than a few discussions about what the fifth estate would mean to the masses, with myself leaning on the side of empowerment and him leaning towards the side of anarchy. It has yet to be seen which way the pendulum will swing, but believe me, it is swaying as we speak. But this brings up an interesting point, doesn't it? I said that journalists are considered people of the fourth estate, yet the focus of this video is on the fifth estate, or game journalism. So how can that be? Well, now we get into the vague, gray territory of how to define what lays within the fourth or the fifth. But for me and for my professor, it was seen that if you wrote mainly for an online publication, your home was within the fifth, and if you wrote for a print publication, your domain was within the fourth. If you really want to be anal about it, we can split the difference and call them 4.5ers, kind of like the old-fashioned isometric 2.5D gaming, back in the early days of the Saturn and the PlayStation. A kind of middle ground of almost there but not quite yet. Either way, for myself and for this video, I'll refer to them as fifth estaters. But I just wanted you to know where the terminology comes from and allow you to make your own determination about it.